Welcome to the second part of our three-part series in web coding. We'll just jump right in. We'll start again with a little bit of where we are at in this series. Last week we went through the HTML, adding the content, the structure to our website. Today we're going to start with CSS, which is how we add the styling to our content. So fonts, colors, the sizing of stuff, the position, all of that's in our CSS. And then next week, we're going to do some more kind of intermediate / advanced CSS topics. The main one is going to be what's called responsive web design. And this is how can we make our site look good on every screen size that someone might be viewing our site from. So whether they're on a laptop, whether they're on tablet or their cell phone, that our website still looks really good and it resizes to each of those screens. Cool. If you should have gotten an email that had a link to the starting code that we're going to use. If you did not, you can go to bit.ly/f24 CSS. So bit.ly/f24 CSS. And if you go there, it should take you to this zip folder that has the code that we're going to work with, and you can just download that right here. So that is bit.ly/f24 CSS. All right. So just like we did with HTML last week, I'll just give a kind of brief overview before we start some coding. So CSS stands for Cascading Style Sheets. The term style sheets comes from newspaper printing, actually. So the style sheet was the document that they used to make sure that their newspapers were styled correctly every time that they printed. And then cascading refers to a bit of a concept within CSS. If you remember last week in the HTML workshop, we were doing some nesting of our elements. So we would have like our div being our container, and then within that div, we indented another different type of element. This creates what's called a parent and child relationship. So that div is the parent element, and then within it, they have their children elements. And the cascade just basically means if I apply a style to the parent element, it also gets applied to the child elements. And we'll see a little bit of that today. At a high level from web design, CSS determines how our HTML elements should be styled. And you can have one CSS file that styles multiple different web pages. You could have multiple CSS files all pointing to the same document to add some more style. There's a bit of complexity there. So we wrote our HTML using elements, and with CSS, we write them using what are called rules. The rules start with the selector, and this is just basically how do you tell the code which elements you want to apply a certain style to. So in this case, I wrote the P, which is the element selector for all of our paragraph text. So this is just basically saying, look at every single paragraph text I have in my code and then apply a certain style to it. After our selector, we have our declaration block, and this can include one or more declarations. And a declaration is essentially just what style are you changing? And that consists of a property and a value. The property is going to be the type of style that we want to change. So color, background color, the font size, the font family, those are all different properties, and we'll learn a bunch today. And then the value is the specific style that you're applying. So this sample code is selecting all of our body text and applying a blue color to the text. But we'll play around with a lot more than just color today. CSS also has a bit of specificity to it as well. There are ways that you can apply multiple different conflicting styles towards the same element. So maybe one piece of your CSS code is saying, hey, change the font color to blue, and another one is saying, hey, change the font color to green. So how does it determine which one to actually do? It depends on how specifically you're targeting that element. It's a little confusing until we start to play around with it. So don't worry if you're a little lost right now. So at the most generic at this bottom would be that universal selector. So this is an asterisk, and this selects every element in our HTML document. One step more specific than that is our element selector, and this is just that HTML tag that we used. So H2, the P, the A for the links, IMG for images. You just write that in the element, and it selects all of those elements in the HTML document. And then last week, we also went through the ID and the class attributes. So we just added that to our HTML elements where it says ID equals or class equals, and then we wrote a certain value in there to give it an identifier. And we can use those to actually target them with our CSS. Class is a little less specific than ID because you can apply the same class to multiple different elements, where an ID you can only apply to one. And so it goes most generic to most specific up here at the top. So if you have a piece of CSS code that is targeting the same element through all of these levels and they conflict, the one that's going to be applied is the one that's the ID because it's the most specific in these four. Now, the next thing is that there's 3 different ways that you can write CSS code. The first way is to add what's called an external style sheet. And this is essentially a separate document that contains all of your CSS code, and you link towards it from your HTML document. There is also the style tag in the HTML where you can add the style starting tag and the style ending tag, and then write CSS code in between that. And then there's also this inline style where you can put style equals and then the specific CSS code you want to do. And this is called inline, and it only applies to one element at a time. We are only going to be working with this external one for a couple of reasons. One is that it makes it into 2 documents so that there is our HTML document and a CSS document. And then when we open up our HTML, we only see our HTML code. When we open up our CSS document, we only see CSS. So it's a little bit easier for our brain to get adjusted to that specific code. The second reason is you can have one CSS document and then link towards that from multiple different web pages. So this allows us to not have to rewrite a bunch of code every time we add a new page to our site. Okay. 2 last things before we jump into actually writing some code. So the first bit is about colors. And CSS has a bunch of different ways on how you can write a color value. This first one is RGB, which stands for red, green, blue. And with that, you specify 3 numbers here. The first one being how much red, the second one being how much green, and the third one being how much blue. The second one adds the A at the end, so this alpha channel, and that just stands for the opacity. So this is a number between 0 and 1, where 0 is fully transparent, so it basically just doesn't show up. And 1 is going to be fully opaque, which means that it's fully colored in. So if you wanted like a semi-transparent color, you would do a number in between 0 and 1. HSL stands for hue, saturation, and lightness. So hue is the actual color that you're going to be doing, and it's a number between 0 and 360. Somewhere on the color wheel. Saturation is how colored or how gray an color is. So 0% would be fully gray and 100% is fully whatever color you picked. And then you can specify somewhere in between. And then L stands for lightness, and that is another percentage between 0 and 100, where 0 is fully dark or black, 100 is fully light or white, and in the middle at 50 is just like the normal color that you're used to. And you can also write that with that opacity at the end as well. This last one is our hex value. And this is the one that I like the most. I think it's the simplest. It is just another way to write this RGB value. When you look up what color you want to work with, you're likely going to see a hex code somewhere. Now, obviously, You're not going to be able to memorize every color known to man and in what value it has. I normally use something like Adobe Color right here. Find the color that I want to do, and then it already gives me that hex code. And so I don't have to keep trying different ones. I can just determine the color that I want and add it. Another one that you can do if you're interested is realtimecolors.com. This one shows a kind of visualization of the colors on a site. And what's really cool about this one is it gives you 5 different colors right here that all kind of blend together. I can click spacebar to just randomize and find a color theme I like. And then let's say I like these colors. I can click on this export and I can see my hex codes right there. So some different ways to find the color that you want and then see what code you need to have that color on your website. Okay, one last bit of pre-coding information. This one can be a little confusing. CSS also has a ton of different units that you can do to determine the size of a piece of content. So on the left, there's some absolute lengths. So centimeters, millimeters, inches, pixels, points, and picas. So these are just ways that you can say 16 pixels is how wide I want something to be. 20 pixels, you're specifying an absolute length or height or width or something of an element. The ones here on the right are more confusing and they're relative to something else. We're going to play around with some of these as we go along, but just know that they're coming. These are 5 different ways that you can specify the size of a piece of content relative to something else. So this first one, this EM, is relative to the default font size of an element. Most body text, for example, on browsers is 16 pixels. So 1 EM would be 16 pixels, 2 EM would be double that, so 32 pixels. And this is easier to resize to different screens, whereas an absolute length would be the same length on every screen. REM gives you a little bit more control. You can specify a font size to be the default and then change it later on by saying 1 REM of whatever you specified to be the same thing, 2 REM to double it, etc. Percentage is going to be to the relative to the parent element, so whatever element it's contained within. And then these viewport height and width ones are basically telling our code, look at the size of someone's screen. So viewport width is saying, look at how wide the screen is that someone's looking at, and then kind of do some calculations to determine how big our content should be on that screen. And same with viewport height, but it's with height. Don't worry if these are a little confusing. We'll get some practice with them. Yeah.
If we are using relative length, like can we define like we are like coding it on a computer, but maybe like most of our customers just watching it on a phone.
Yeah. Yeah, so that's why you would use a relative length so that if we're doing it based on a computer, for example, and we want to make sure that it's going to be on a phone, we can either do a strategy that we're going to do next week, that responsive web design, or we can use some relative lengths. So for example, we could say maybe like to the parent element is going to be our div, our section, and that takes up the entire width of our screen, for example. And maybe we want some element within it to be 50% of that, right? So only half of that width. And that'll change based on how big someone's screen is. It'll always be 50%, right? So we'll get more practice with that next week. Cool. So let's actually get to writing some code. If you want to follow along with our starting code, it's at bit.ly/F24CSS. So bit.ly/F24CSS. And you can download it, and that should give you a .zip file onto your computer wherever you downloaded it. When you double click it, it'll open it up as a folder. So in my case, I opened it up a couple times, so now I get CSS Workshop 3. But when you double click, you should get a CSS Workshop folder somewhere. So click and drag that onto your Visual Studio Code icon in your taskbar down here. Mine is not being too friendly. Another way that you can do this if you don't have it down here is to open Visual Studio Code and click File and then do Open Folder. It's important to do Open Folder and not just Open, because Open Folder will take in every bit of content within that folder, where just Open, you can only select one file.
Doesn't make sense with the program we done last week.
Yeah, so this is different from what we did last week, just because I wanted to provide some more content to play around with. You can also just open the one that we did last week if you just want to play around with that as well.
Drag the file right inside with like the code mix together.
So if you drag the folder to Visual Studio Code, it's just going to open that folder. It's not going to combine any code. It's not going to combine any files. Yeah, so you go to bit.ly/f24 CSS. You download, and then in your Finder, there should be a .zip folder wherever you downloaded. You just double click on that, and you should get a CSS Workshop folder. So double click here, you'll get one of these. And then you just click and drag the folder onto Visual Studio Code if you have it in your taskbar. If you don't, you can just open Visual Studio Code and go File, Open Folder, and then go and find that folder and then click Open. Cool. So an overview of what you're going to see in here. So we have our index.html file. This is a bunch of HTML code. All of it should be familiar to you if you were here last week. The only thing that is slightly different that I just honestly forgot to delete was this data theme equals light. Just a little forewarning, we're not going to go through this next week either, but this is just one way that you can code a light and dark theme switcher for your website. If we have time next week, I'll show you how to do it, but it does go through JavaScript, which is a little bit more intense for what we're doing this this time around. So this isn't going to impact us in any way. You can delete it if you want. But everything else we did go through last week, I believe. If not, I put a bunch of comments in here so that you can see what each bit of code is doing here. We also have our assets folder, which has a documents folder with one document, an images folder with a bunch of images that we're going to use, and our logos folder with some logos. Cool. So I have the live server extension. If this is your first time with Visual Studio Code and you didn't do this last week, if you go to extensions and you search up live server and you install this one right here, we're going to be using that. And so I'm going to go and open up my live server. So again, that's just extensions, live server. If you were here last week, we did that last week. And if I click go live down here, I will see what my website looks like. And you'll notice it is just kind of like we did with HTML last week. It looks kind of bad, but this is what HTML code is styled by default. So you see the importance of adding some CSS here. Cool. So I'm going to keep that open so I can see. So we are going to start off with a little bit of HTML code that is related to CSS. So the first thing that I want you to do is to go to fonts.google.com. You can also search up Google Fonts on your browser. So Google Fonts is an online font service that has over 1,700 different fonts that you can add to your website. And they make it super easy to do this to code as well. So I'm just going to go and pick 2 fonts, and I'm going to pick this Open Sans one right here and this Montserrat one right here. So these are the 2 that I'm going to pick. You can pick whatever 2 you want to use. And how you do it is you click on the font and you click this Get Font button, and it adds it to your font cart. So I added Open Sans, and I'm going to go and add Montserrat as well. And click Get Font. So you can go to fonts.google.com and find this Montserrat and this Open Sans font. You just click on them and you click Get Font, and you go back and you do the other one. So once you have whatever fonts you want to install on your site, in your font cart, which you can access by going up to this top right button, you should click on this Get Embed Code. And this will take you to a new page, and it'll show you a ton of different ways that you can add this code to your site. And we're just going to do the default one right here. So under the Web tab, it's already selected with this link tag. And this is the code that I need to add to my site in order to let me use these fonts in my coded site. So I can just click copy code, and I am going to go over back to Visual Studio Code, and I'm going to add it in my head section right here near the top. And I'm just going to paste it in and then do some indentation to make it look better. So you would go to and add your fonts. So like I could add Roboto, click Get Font. Up here in this family one, you should also, if you're on where you've selected them all, there's Get Embed Code on the right. Click there, and it's this first bit of code right here, where it says Embed Code in the head of your HTML. And you can just click this copy code button and then paste it in our head section. Yes, it's wherever, in between the starting and the closing. Yeah. So this is a way that you can add some new fonts to use with your site. And we're going to be using these ones today. So now what we need to do is let's create our document to have all of our CSS code. So in Visual Studio Code, on your left-hand side, you should have the Explorer open up here. And if you hover over where it says CSS Workshop, you'll be able to see these buttons right here. And you can just click on that first one to add a new file. And you'll get this blank spot over here in the Explorer. And we're just going to name it styles.css. And I'm going to press enter. So that created our new file, which you can just do up here. You click this add file button and you name it. Cool. So now we need to actually make a link between our HTML file and our CSS file. And this is what allows us to actually write this code in a separate file, but have it connected to our HTML code. And this link we can add to every single HTML file that we create, this kind of link path, and then this code will be applied to every page that we create whenever we add this link. So if you go back to our HTML, still in our head section, let's add some lines, and we're going to use that same link tag that Google Fonts did. So we're going to do our open caret, LINK, and then with our links, you'll notice up here that there's always this REL attribute, and this is just the relationship. So if we put REL equals, and this is basically us telling the code what type of link we're adding here. So for CSS, we're going to do style sheet. And then we also have to add that href attribute to link to our actual file. So let's go to the very end of our current line of code, add a space, and put href equals. And then remember from last week, we just add the file path to our new styles.css. Visual Studio Code makes it super easy. Do a period / to look in the same folder. And I have my, my file right here. If it was added into your assets folder, which you should be able to see in our Explorer right here, you might have to click into here and find it, but you should be able to find your styles.css file. And then make sure to close off your tag with that closing caret. So the whole line of code is link rel equals style sheet, href equals, and then the file path to our CSS file. So I'm going to Command S to save this. And I always like to test to make sure that I did this correctly. So what we're going to do is a very brief CSS thing. So if we go back to our styles.css file, let's write some code in here. So we're going to put an asterisk, and this is going to target every element on our page. Let's put a space and then the curly brackets. So you should only have to type the opening one, and Visual Studio Code should add your closing one. I'm going to press enter or return. You don't have to. This just makes it a little bit easier to read, in my opinion. And I'm going to just write background hyphen color, put a colon and a space. And then I'm just going to put in the word green. You can put in a different color word if you want. And I'm just going to save this. So now if I go to my live server site, which is a tab in my Google Chrome, I can see that background color was changed to green. We're not going to keep this, obviously. I just wanted to make sure that my link was working correctly. So if we go back here, this is the CSS code that I used. So asterisk, space, our curly brackets, background hyphen color, colon, green, and then the semicolon at the end to close it off. And then the link in that HTML is here again. So this code. So my asterisk, and then my curly brackets, background hyphen color, colon, green, semicolon. And that's changing the background color of every element on my site to green. Okay, so now that I know it's working, I'm gonna delete this code because obviously it did not look great. And we're gonna add the code that actually does look a little good. So we are going to start off again, like we did with our HTML, and show you how to write code that doesn't actually do anything. It's just those comments that we do to write little notes to ourselves. It is different than the HTML comment, where our HTML comments before were our opening caret, exclamation point, hyphen, hyphen, and then we write our code. In CSS, it is a / and an asterisk. And then we can write what our comment is. So I'm just going to put global styles here. This is just basically meaning things that are applying to everything on my site. The thing with CSS that is a little bit different from the HTML here is it's not adding that ending of the comment. So if I were to keep just entering and typing, it's still going to be a comment. So I do need to close it off. And it's the same exact thing, but backwards. So an asterisk and then a /. So / asterisk, write your comment, and then asterisk, and then / to end it. And that's how you write a comment in CSS. Cool. I'm just going to Command S to save that. One thing that can get a little tricky working with CSS and HTML in separate files is kind of having to go back and forth, right? We don't want to have to keep doing that to see what we're doing. So I am just going to control click up here on my styles.css tab. And I'm going to click split right. And then I can go over here and navigate to my HTML file. So now I can see both my HTML file and my CSS file at the same time. And I'm going to click over here on the Explorer thing to close that so I have some more screen real estate. Cool. So now let's actually do some of these colors changes that we want to do and talk about a little bit more about how you change the color of things in CSS. So we already did the background color, so let's do that with a better looking color. So I'm going to do the asterisk again, space, opening curly bracket, and then enter. And I'm going to use the same thing from before. So background hyphen color, and then put my colon and then a space. And now there's another way that you can do colors. So before we did green, which was just a keyword, there is about 140 different colors that have these keywords. But obviously there's a lot more than 140 colors available. So we're going to use a hex code. So I'm going to do a pound symbol first to start off our hex code. And then I'm going to type in F1, FD, F6. So this is just kind of like an off-white color. And then with my CSS declaration, you always want to end it with your semicolon, because that just kind of tells the code, hey, I'm done with this. I'm not adding anything more. You can always change it later though. So if I Command S right here, and I go back to my site, it's a little bit hard to see because it's not too off-white, but it's not a pure white anymore. The next color one that I want to do is the one that I actually had in my slide, which is just the word color. So at the end of my background color declaration, I'm just going to press enter. I'm going to type in the word color and then do a colon. The difference between color and background color is that the background does the background color and just color does the foreground color, which is most likely going to be your text color. You pretty much only apply it to text. And so I am going to do another space, do the pound symbol, and this time I'm going to do 0, 4, 1B 1 0 and then end it with a semicolon. And this is like an off black. So just the opposite of what we did before. And so I'm going to Command S and go back to here. And now all of my text is going to be a little bit of an off black. It's just personal preference. I don't like pure whites and pure blacks on screens. I think it can be a little straining on the eyes to see that all the time. So I try to go a little off to make it a little bit easier. So there's one last somewhat color property that I want to show you, and that's the opacity one. So if you remember from the slide with both the RGB and the HSL values, you could add that A to add like an opacity between 0 and 1. You can do the same by just using the opacity property. So I'm just going to do one right here, press enter, type in opacity, put my colon. And here you would want to put, again, that number between 0 and 1, 0 being fully transparent, 1 being fully opaque. So if I put 0 and then a semicolon and I save it and I go back, you see that everything went away. What happened? Oh, it's because I made everything transparent, is essentially what I did right here. But just to show you how that looks, if I were to change it to 0.5, for example, I can now see it should. It's a little bit hard to see. It's there though. It's like half transparent, half colored. I'll make it a little bit more obvious. Let's do like 0.8 maybe. Here we go. So then you can go somewhere in between 0 and 1 to have it be like somewhat transparent. Obviously, that doesn't look good with all of our content. So I'm going to delete that line, but just to show you how that opacity property works. Okay, so Command S'ing to save again. Any questions about colors in CSS? Cool. So let's move on to a little bit more about something else that you're probably going to want to change, and that is fonts, stuff with our typography. So the first thing that we're going to do is to change our font that we're actually using on our site. So still in our global styles, let's enter. And on our new line, this is the property to change the actual font that you're going to use. So like Times New Roman, Arial, the Google fonts that we selected. It is called the font hyphen family. And I'm going to put a colon here. And then I can type the name of the font that I want to use. So because I linked my Google fonts, I can use those right now by typing in that name. So let's start by typing in that Montserrat one. If you chose a different one, feel free to use something else. And then end it with that semicolon. I'm going to save and go back. And you'll notice that my font has now changed for all my text. So again, that was just font hyphen family colon, and then you write the name. So a note about fonts and on websites. So even though we are doing a website, the font that displays actually depends on if the user has that font installed on their computer. We kind of avoided that using a Google font that we embedded into our code. So now no matter what, this code will be here, right? But let's say I don't embed a Google font and I want to do something else. So I'm just going to put Arial, for example. And you'll notice that there is this drop down that's kind of showing me this thing, and that's what we're going to be doing. But Arial is a font that I haven't embedded into my code. And so it's only going to show if the person's computer has Arial installed on that computer, right? So what we can do is set fallback fonts that says, hey, if the user doesn't have this specific font installed on their computer, try this other one. So this one is telling me Helvetica is a good pairing for it, but you can do whatever you want. So I could say maybe I want Arial, but maybe after that, I want it to use my Google font and put Montserrat right here. And so this code is basically saying, hey, if the user has Arial installed, do that. If not, check for Montserrat, and because we embedded it, it'll definitely be there. So if you're not using a Google font, if you're using something else, always set fallback fonts. Even if you are using a Google font, I just tend to do it, get in the habit. And then I always like to end it with a keyword as well. It's pretty standard practice. So if I do another comma and a space, you can put keywords like serif or sans serif or monospace here to say, hey, if the user doesn't have any of these other ones, just pick one in this category. So a serif is the type of fonts that have those like little extra things at the end. So, you know, there's like the T and it has like the hanging things up at top. That's a serif font. Sans serif doesn't have those. And then monospace is the one that kind of looks like code. Like every space, every letter takes up the same amount of space. And so you can just put in all lowercase, that kind of fallback catch all right here. And so now this is saying, hey, check for Arial. If they don't have that, check for Montserrat. If we didn't embed that and they don't have that, then it's going to fall back onto whatever the default sans serif font is on that user's computer. If you are curious, here's I think a neat thing. If you look up CSS web safe fonts and you click on here, it'll show you, oh, that's not actually the website I want to do. It's at cssfontstack.com. And this basically tells you these different fonts that are on most computers. It'll tell you the percentage. So for example, if you're going to use Lucida Grand, it's on 100% of Mac computers, it says. So it's great for Mac users, but it's on 0% of the Windows. So people who are accessing your website from a Windows computer probably will not see this font because it said 0% of Windows have it installed. So that's why you set a default backup as well. So this is at cssfontstack.com. These are generally considered some good fonts to do because they're a little bit more common than some other ones.
What's that? You know, like just like for universal font that you can people like Peter branded, then for people who don't have it, also people have it like what we should have, would you just automatically replace with another font or
that's why we add extra. So comma. So I would probably do, honestly, I'd say like I'll do Lucida Grand. If there is multiple words in it, put it in between like some quotation marks so that it's like it's all combined together. Otherwise, it'll think it's separate things. And then I'd probably just go here and look for one that a lot of Windows people have. So maybe I like Arial as a substitute, and then I'd put that one right there.
would any replacements what's gonna happen? It's just gonna like
It's gonna pick whatever the like a default theme, like a default font, essentially. So I'm gonna go back to my Montserrat one, and then I'm just gonna put one backup of just the keyword of sans serif. And I'm gonna save that. The next one that we're gonna go through, if we enter, and let's type out font hyphen style. So STYLE. And if I put in this colon, you'll see that I have some options right here. Really, the only two that you're ever going to use are those top two, so italic or normal. Oblique is one that's like slightly less italic, but not a lot of browsers actually have that supported. So it's pretty much italic or normal. So if I put italic and then my semicolon and I save it, now back on my website, it's all italic. And so that's just font style, colon, italic. Another one that we're going to do is if we know how to do italic, we probably want to know how to do bold. And that is through the font hyphen weight property. And when I do my colon here, you'll see I have a bunch of options. So there is normal. We can have some keywords of bold, bolder, which is just like even more bold than bold, and then lighter, which is just lighter than normal. But then there's also all of these numbers right here. So 100, 200, 300, etc. 400 is going to be your regular, and I believe 700 is the bold one. So if I just put in 900, this is going to make things super bold. So I'm going to save that, and I go back, and it's unnormally bold. I can also use the keyword of bold, for example, just to have a pretty standard bold right here.
bold, like in the paragraph.
Mhm.
Like this one paragraph, but there are only like one or two words that use bold. So like, what should we do?
Yeah, so if you only want specific words to be bold, if I get rid of this, I can show you. So we can go into our HTML code, and let's say I wanted, just pick any words that you want. You can encapsulate them into a tag called strong. So if I did an opening tag of strong, and then I move my closing tag to the end of where I wanted it to be bold, for example. So within my paragraph, I have strong, these 4 words, and then the closing strong, and I save. I can go back and only those 4 words are going to be bolded. With the strong one, if you want it to be slightly more customizable and you're going to do some other stuff than just bold, you can also use what's called the span tag. The span essentially doesn't do anything by default. So if I were to go this and I'm using those same 4 right here and I go back, it doesn't do anything, right? But it just separates them out. So now I can go up here, use my element selector, which we haven't gone through yet, and that's just typing the name of that element. So in this case, it's span. Add another thing, and I could say font weight, let's say, is going to be that 900, so that extra super bold. And I were to save that, I go back and it does the same thing, but instead of it just being strong, which is going to be that default bold thing, I have a little bit more customization there because I put it into a span and then I targeted that with my CSS. Cool. So I'll delete that and save both. Okay. So one last font thing that I want to show you is going to be the font size, which does exactly what you think it does. So font hyphen size, and this is going to be how big you want your font to be. They do have some keywords that you can use. So large, larger, medium, small. You might have to play around with those to see if you like any of those. You can also do those units that we talked about before. So I can do an absolute unit like 20 pixels. So 20 px, for example. If I command and save that, all of my things, because I'm targeting everything with that universal selector, all of my text is now 20 pixels. You can also, if you want it to be a little bit more of like that relative that we did, we can put like 2 EM, for example, and then that semicolon. And basically what this does, if I go back here, is it looks at like some default thing and then it blows it up. So obviously it doesn't look good. So as you're getting started, I recommend just using pixel values and figuring things out. So let's delete these 2, the font style and the font size, just to make things kind of go back to like a normal text for now. So if I go back, my text should now be normal, like that. The only thing I changed now was that the type of font that I was using. Okay. Any questions about font? Okay. So I have 2 different text things that aren't like changing the font itself. They're that I'm going to show you. So let's kind of stop using this universal one. Let's only apply it to some of our headings. So I'm going to start a new section with my comment. So the / asterisk, and I'm going to say heading styles space asterisk / to write my comment. So now I only want to apply some of this styling to like my headings. So I am going to first style my page title, my H1. So to target my H1s, I just say H1, and then I can space and then start my block as well. So this is different. Whereas before, the asterisk is going to target every element I have on my site on this linked page. This one is saying, look for my H1 elements, which I only have one because you should only have one on a page because it's your page title. So here, what I want to do is I want to center it. And so makes it super easy with text. You can do text hyphen align. So ALIGN And if you put that colon in there, you get those kind of keywords that you can use. So left is going to be that left aligned, center is going to be center, right's going to be on the right, and justify is going to try to fill up the whole space. You know, like in newspapers when it like kind of cuts with the hyphen and then it continues and it's just like one big block of text. That's what justify is. So I can just put center and my semicolon. I'm going to Command S to save it. And if I go to my live server site, I can now see that my title is centered on there. You may be finding that code is very specific and you have to spell things correctly and type things incorrectly. So a lot of it is just going to be getting in the habit of writing something in a certain way. The second and final text thing that I want to show you is our how to underline something if you want to underline some text. So this time I'm going to do it for all of my H2s, so my about me projects, but I also want to do it for my H3s. So I have some H3s in my project section that is the name of each project. So I could do H2 like this, type in my CSS code here, H3, go here, and duplicate my code, right? However, obviously that's going to add a ton of lines if you keep doing that for everything that you ever want to do. So a quick little trick that you can do is if you want to target multiple different selectors at the same time, you can type in the first one. So my H2, for example, I put a comma and a space, and then I put my next one. So H3, and then I'm gonna put my space and my curly brackets. So now what this is saying, instead of having to put H2 and then my code and then H3 and then my code, this is saying apply the styles to all of my H2s and all of my H3s. To do the underline, that is going to be text hyphen decoration. You can get more specific, as you can see here. So you could do the line, so the type of underline that you're doing, the color of the underline, the style, the thickness. But we're just going to do the basic. We're just going to do our hyphen or our colon, sorry. You can do a dashed, a dotted, a double one. You can put the line through the text. You can do an overline, so there's like a border at the top. But I'm just going to type in underline. And if I save that, and I go back here, I can see that my H3s and my H2s all have my underline that I added. Okay, feeling good about text and how to modify some text with CSS? Cool. So the next thing that I want to do is work with the sizing of these images because they're so big, it's making looking at this site a little annoying. So I want to change how these are sized. But first I want to show you a tool that you can use in Google Chrome that one allows you to see the code for any website on the web. And it's going to be a little bit helpful for the stuff that we're just about to learn with the sizing. So if you open up your site or another site in Google Chrome and you control click anywhere on the site. So control click, I should see this pop up and click on an inspect. So this brings up what is called Chrome Developer Tools. Mine might look a little bit different because I've played around with it, but you'll notice in this elements that this is all of my HTML code in that file that I wrote. So again, to get here, I controlled click on a Google Chrome website and clicked inspect. And so I can see all of my HTML code, including the comments. So even though the comments aren't doing anything in my code or displaying anything, they can still be seen by other people if they know how to do this. In the styles down here is also really nice because it can show which CSS code I have. So we can see some of that background color, my font family. And I can also see a little bit of the, in these italics, of the code that Google Chrome is applying to my code by default. Now, let's say I wanted to zero in on my heading right here, this about me. I can click on this button right here, which is like a dotted square with this arrow. Go over here, click on here. It'll take me to my code in the HTML. It'll also show me my styles that are applied. If I go to this computed tab right here with something selected, it's going to show me which code is specifically applying to which element. So I have my About Me H2 selected. On the Computed tab, I can see that this is the code that is applying to that heading. So as you start adding more code, if you see I'm trying to do something and it's not working, you can always kind of open it up in Google Chrome and see what's happening right there. And if you were to expand, you can kind of see where in that that file that it is. If you go to the styles, I don't know if it'll show one because it's pretty basic so far. But if it has multiple conflicting styles, it'll show the one like regular, like this. And then if there's one that it is overriding, it'll show it with a strike through. So if I were to do this, for example, I just turned it off, but let's say I had a different font family targeting this, but more specifically, right? So we did it with our universal element. But if I were to go into something more specific, like the element, that class, that ID, and override that with a font family, this is how it would look in Chrome DevTools. So I can see kind of why it's being stricken out is because someone overrode it somewhere else, basically. Just a thing to note, not super applicable right now. The thing that we're going to cover right now is if you click on some element with this tool right here, and you go to Computed, you'll see this diagram. And this is a representation of what is called the box model. So every element on a page has a box. And this blue right here is telling you how big the content is. Outside of the content, we can add some padding, which is just some more extra space. We can add a border around the content as well. And then the margin is going to be the distance between this content and other elements. You can edit all of these using CSS. So let's start doing that with some of our images. So I'm going to click on this, inspect this first image, and I can see probably the reason why my image is so big is that it is 5,280 pixels wide, which is much bigger than my screen. And so we're going to do some editing of these properties in our CSS code. So if I go back to Visual Studio Code, you will notice with these images right here that they are all just kind of placed in there, right? But I also do have images elsewhere for like the logo. So one way that we could target just our project images, but not the logo one, is we could add a class to here, right? So we could say like class equals, and then in here, project image, right? And add that to each one and then target that class. We can also do something even more specific. So I'm gonna not alter that. I'm not gonna add that to everything. So I'm gonna save this. And you'll notice that each of these images is housed within a div, right? So each project, so project 1 has its own div, project 2 has its own div, project 3, and so on and so forth. CSS allows us to select the children of a parent element. Okay, so this div for project 1 is the parent element, and then this image is going to be one of those children, right? So I want to target each of these divs, which thankfully I've added the classes there, right? So class project card. So if I wanted to target every project card class element, I'd put a period in my CSS and then the name that I assigned. So in this case, project-card. And this is the selector to select every element that I have put class equals project-card to. But this is going to select every single div, but I wanted to select the image. So how you can say, look at every div that has this class, and then find the image within it is put a space, a kind of forward caret, so the one that points towards, and then I can put IMG. So this whole thing says, look for every element that has class equal to project-card. Look within that element and find every image. So in this case, we have our project of our div of class equals project hyphen card, and then it looks within and it finds this image. Okay, it's a little bit of an advanced thing that we're getting a little bit more in. So let's space and create our new block. So now this is going to alter all of my project images at the same time. So I don't have to keep adding it or accidentally do other images. It's specifically selecting those images for me. So I'm going to want to change the size of that content, right? So if we go back to this Chrome DevTools, I can see that it is this 5280 for this image. This image is 7,129, but maybe I want to make them all into a pretty standard size. Let me find the specific number that I put that works the best for our stuff. There we go. I actually used some percentages, so we're going to just play around for right now. So the width of my screen desktops is usually around 1440 pixels. Obviously every computer is like slightly different. So let's just do width, and let's actually just do 100%. So 100% and then our semicolon, and let's save this. So now if I go back to here, I'm gonna get rid of Chrome DevTools. Now it's fit every single image to be 100% of the width of my screen. There is a little bit of a margin just because Google Chrome adds that by default. You can override it. But also if I could specify like a pixel thing. So if I wanted it to just be like 1000 pixels instead, not 100, let's do 1000 pixels, so px, and I were to save that, now my images are all 1000 pixels wide. Cool. You can also change the height as well. So right now, when I just did the width, it's going to dynamically change the height for me to keep the same resolution, right? So it has a ratio of my height to width for each image. It's going to try to keep that so that the image still looks pretty good. But maybe I want to say height, and just to play around, have some fun, I'm going to put 100 pixels instead here. And if I save this, you'll notice that now I specified 1000 pixels of a width, 100 for my height, and it's going to look kind of funny just because I picked some funny numbers. With web development, obviously with websites, you're scrolling down a lot. So height doesn't matter as much as width. Width is making sure that all the content fits side to side on the screen without having to do a weird horizontal scroll. But most people are used to vertical scrolling, so I'm just going to delete that height, but just so you know how you can change the height of something right there. Okay, any questions about height or width of stuff? Okay, cool. So let's move one level out. Remember in the Chrome DevTools, it showed us the content size, and then right outside of that, there was the padding for our stuff. So padding is going to be the space between your content and its border. Even if you haven't specified a border for a piece of content, it's going to have an invisible one that just kind of shows where the sides are. Okay, so let's increase that space between this content and right now this invisible border. So I'm going to add another line in my project -card forward image, and we can start off by saying what side of our padding that we want to change. So we can do padding hyphen top and then our colon. And again, there's a bunch of units that we can use. Let's just put 50 pixels. I'm going to save that. And if I go back here, you can see it's changed a little bit, right? Because before it had projects, and then right underneath it, it was the image. But now there's some kind of space in between there, right? If I control click, inspect, and I can go to my image and I hover over it, you'll see in green that it added that 50 pixels of padding to the top that I specified before. And so if you want to see how that looks turned off, it kind of adds some space right there. You can also do it for our other sides. So padding bottom would be for the bottom part. So let's just put 50 pixels there as well. You can also do padding on the left, and you can also do padding on the right. So I'm just gonna put 50 pixels on every side of padding, and I'm gonna save that. And it's just top, bottom, left, right. I go back to Google Chrome and I can see it's moved around a little bit. It's added some space between some of my content. If I control click and I inspect again and I go over, you'll see that now I have 50 pixels of this green highlight, which Chrome DevTools means padding. And when I click on it and I look at that box model over here, I can see that it says 50 on each of them as well, because that's what I added. So as you can imagine, adding padding to each side is a little arduous and a little annoying because you're doing it top for the bottom, for the left, for the right. So let's delete all that. I'm going to show you a shortcut. So if we delete all that, let's just type in padding and then this colon. So this is a shorthand way of doing our padding on every side of this element. So before we typed in padding top, padding bottom, padding left, padding right. To do that for every element, all these times, we're adding so many lines of code to our site. We can shorten it down to one line by just saying padding. With this padding, you can do 4 numbers just right by each other. So I can do 50 pixels, 50 pixels, 50 pixels, 50 pixels. And I can do my semicolon and save. And that'll do the same exact thing as we had before, adding all of that space to every side. So the numbers correspond to the sides in a clockwise manner. So our first one right here is that top value. Our second one is going to be our right. The third one is going to be our bottom. And the fourth one is going to be our left. So we can even specify different numbers right here. So maybe we want the right and the left side to be even further with some space. So if I were to change the second for the right to 100 and the fourth for the left to 100, I can see that that has now changed as well. Did I save? I think it is. So now I can see that I have 50 on the top and the bottom and 100 on the left and the right. So now you might notice, okay, the top and the bottom are the same number, the left and the right are the same number. Is there an easier way to write this? And there is. So you can shorten this code even more. So if your top and the bottom, you want to have the same number value, and the left and the right, you want to have the same number value, you just have to write them once each. So I'm going to put padding, colon, 50 pixels, space, 100 pixels. So this is now saying for this first number, it's going to determine both the top and the bottom. And then the second number is going to be my left and my right. So I didn't change anything in terms of those values. So my content's still the same. But I just shortened it even more by doing the top and the bottom at the same time and the left and the right at the same time. If every side you want to just be the same, you can just put that one number. So padding, colon, 50 pixels. This sets the padding top, left, right, and bottom all at the same time to the same number if you only specify one number right here. Okay, so I want to add a little bit of a visual to this as well. So I want us to go that next level in our diagram. If I were to go back here. So we've talked about our content with our height and our width. We've talked about the padding, which is right outside of it. So let's go to the next thing and let's talk about some borders if you want to add a border to some content. So let's just put a enter and create a new line. So I can start typing in border, and you'll notice that it does the same thing, top, left, right, bottom. You can specify all of those specifically as well. If I were to go border top, for example, I can specify the color, the width, the style, and all of that specifically for just the top. But we're going to start off with the shorthand right here. So just border, right? Just quickening the way that we do some stuff. So when we do the border shorthand, we can put a couple of things here. The first one being the width of our border. So I'm going to put a 5 pixel border. I'm going to put a space. The next thing that you would put here is the style. So this could be dashed, it could be dotted, it could be solid, it could be double. There's a bunch of different ones. So I'm just going to put solid as the keyword and put a space. And the last thing that I can specify in this shorthand is the color that I want my border to be. So I'm just going to put red right here as a keyword. And I'm going to put a semicolon to end it off. So if I Command S and I go back, I can now see that I have a 5-pixel solid red border all the way around each of my project images. You'll notice that there is space in between my image and the border, and that's that padding that we were just editing. Now you can, if you want it to be really fancy, you can change each side of your border specifically. So maybe I just want border top to be like that. So border hyphen top is like that. Maybe border hyphen right. I'm going to do 10 pixels of dashed green. Maybe my border bottom, I am going to do 25 pixels of dotted blue. I'm just showing you some of the different things that you can do. This is going to look really bad, I'm going to warn you. Bottom hyphen left. Let's do another 5 pixels of double yellow. Oh, border left. It's gonna look bad. Don't worry, we'll delete it. So I added, you can see all of those different border styles and widths that you can change on each side. So I'm gonna go back. I'm going to switch it back to just be our solid red 5 pixels, just so we can keep seeing something there. The last border thing that I want to show you is going to be how to get those curved corners on your borders. So if you're looking at this border right here, you might look at this and say, this looks very early internet days. Everything was like a square. But if you look at everything that's published today, it's so curved and rounded. We can change that using our border radius. So I am going to do border hyphen radius and then colon. And this, I'll put the units for how curved I want my border to be. So I'm just going to put 25 pixels and then my semicolon, and I'll save this. And when I go back, I can now see that I have my rounded border. So that's my border hyphen radius. And then I put the size of that curve that I want to do. It's a little bit hard to sometimes figure out how curved you want it to be and how to translate that to a number. It's a lot of trial and error and playing around with and seeing how it looks. Okay, our last bit of this box model for determining how much space this element takes up is going to be our margin. And so a margin is the space between one element's border and its neighboring element's borders as well. So right now, we just have the default margins, which are pretty close to 0. So it kind of flushes up right next to this button, for example. So maybe I want to give it some more room to breathe, some more space. So it is as simple as doing margin. Again, you can go to margin top, margin bottom, margin left, margin right to specify each side. This is mostly where this is super helpful to specify, because maybe, for example, we like the amount of space between this bottom and the next part right here, but maybe we just want to add some more before the actual image border right here. So I'm just going to do margin top, put my colon, and I'm going to want to add 10 pixels of a margin, let's say. And I'm going to put my semicolon. And when I save this margin top to 10 pixels, I can go back to here and I can see I now have a little bit more breathing room in between this border and the surrounding element at the top. If I were to go and inspect this image, you'll notice that even though the image itself is only taking up a certain amount, there's a bunch of these other kind of factors that are saying how big this is kind of taking up, even if it is mostly white space that we're adding. If I click on here, I can see all of those values that I've added right here. The fun thing about Chrome DevTools, you can do this on any site that you want. So maybe I want to go to the Annenberg website, and maybe I control click inspect. I'm going to go to this learn more button. Maybe I think that I can do this better, let's say. And then I can click in here to this margin left. I can add 100. It's going to move it around for me. I can change the color, let's say, to some color that we have. Maybe we want it to be like this. So I can play around with these published websites. It does not save, so don't worry. I'm not going to screw over our marketing and communications team by doing this. All I have to do to get out of here is just refresh, and then it re-asks from that server for that file stuff. So yeah, if there are websites that are out there that you like, you want to see how they set it up, you can definitely inspect their code. You can play around with it and see what you can do on some published sites. All right, cool. So looking at our site, we're able to add some styling. Obviously, we're just kind of doing a bunch of random stuff right here. And so it doesn't look maybe as great as we would like it to be, but I do want to show you at least one thing to be like, we can actually do something cool with what we have learned. And that's going to be with these view buttons right here. So this is just like a default kind of button. It doesn't look good. Let's make it look a lot more better and a lot more modern. So I'm going to go to my Visual Studio Code. And I have added that class to every single one of my view buttons. So class is that view hyphen button. Does anyone remember how we target all elements of a class with CSS? It is on our CSS code. Yes, the dot. Perfect. So you put a dot and then the name of the class. So in this case, it's going to be view hyphen button. And so now this is going to target every element that I have put my view button class set to. So let's kind of bring a lot of this together and make this look a lot better here. So the first thing that I see that I want to change in my view button is that I want the font size to be bigger. I want it to look a little bit easier to read. So I can do that by doing font hyphen size colon, and I'm just going to pick 24 pixels. I'll make it a bit bigger and I'll save. And I can go back and now all of my view buttons are bigger with my text. The next thing that I see that I want to be different here is that I want the background color to not be that off-white that we set to everything here. Now, I don't have to delete this and rewrite my code in any way, because remember that our class is more specific than our universal element here. So I can still put background hyphen color, and what I put here is going to override whatever I put in that universal style. So let's make it a nice blue color. So I'm going to put the pound symbol, I'm going to do 8CD, FEC, and then my semicolon. And when I save this and I go back here, I get this nice blue background color on my button instead. So now looking back at that button, that black color, I don't think really matches really well with that blue. So I'm going to change the text color as well. You remember how to do this? Text color? Yeah, just color. So in this case, I'm just going to use that same background color that I use for the rest of my elements. So F1, FD, F6, and then my semicolon. It's the same as that background color. So now it's this white color here. However, that's a little hard to read with how it is right now. So I'm going to make it a little bit bolder here. So you can do that by doing our font weights, and I'm going to mark it as bold. And now I save that and I go back here and it's bolded. It's a little bit easier to read right there. Okay. So far I've targeted all my view buttons. I've changed the font size, the background color, the text color, and then how bold my text is. Now, the next thing that I see in here that I don't like is that border. By default, the browser will add a kind of boring border right here, but I can actually change it to have no border. So I can put border colon none and then do my semicolon. And what this does is it takes a default border style that Google Chrome put on my buttons and gets rid of it. So border colon none. And now I go back and there's no border right there. Yeah. A click sound. Yeah, so you can place sounds on a website using JavaScript, which